Farhan, Ali, Hasnain, Assalamu alaikum to you all. Farhan,
Walaikum
thanks so much for
assalam.
joining us on this podcast. Really appreciate it. We're discussing something we've never discussed on this podcast before, which is food, which I never thought would kind of fall under the topic of culture, but just after Hasnain told me about the way you talk about food and the way you talk about how it represents your identity, I just felt that we had to dive in. So just really wanted to appreciate you taking from your time to come on this podcast. Much appreciated. Before we get started,
Yeah, of course. I mean, I appreciate y'all having me.
thanks so much. Before we get started, I wanted to ask each and every one of you the question, which is, what is your favorite kind of food and why? Ali, let's go with you first.
So my absolute favorite is rice and lentils.
Wow,
Yeah.
really?
It's because when you get to an older age, you have to start, you gotta start eating rice and
I'll watch your
lentils.
fiber intake.
Yeah, being here in Colombia, what I get rice, plantain, avocado, and beans. So it's sort of equivalent, but that's my absolute favorite.
And obviously you have that Colombian coffee. Like, in Colombia, when you want coffee, do you just go outside and pick up some soil and just take it home and put it in the cup, or?
You just put your head out the window, it rains coffee.
Wonderful. Okay, that wasn't the answer I was expecting. Farhan, I'll leave you last because I feel like you got the best answer. Hasnain, what's your favorite type of food? And I know, Hasnain, you're a foodie, right? You love food. You spend a lot on food, which we'll discuss.
Yeah, I do.
What is your favorite? What's your favorite food?
So when it comes to like South Asian cuisine, Nahari is my favorite.
Okay.
But when it comes to like, I mean, if those of you who follow me know, I go to Nusrat kind of often. So
Okay,
I
Mr.
like
Shaw.
steak. I like steak. Steak is my favorite type of dish. I just love meat. I just love a nice tomahawk steak.
That's a man's meal, right? Is that the point you're trying
It's
to
a
make?
man's meal.
So for me, my favorite dish of all time is saag gosht with naan. That for me is
Very
absolutely,
interesting. Yeah.
that for me is unbeatable because like when I grew up, my I mean, we'll talk about this more in the podcast, but when I grew up, the only kind of thing that was Pakistani about us was the food we ate. And my mum and dad used to make a few dishes, one being dal, one being bindi, and one being saag. And whenever they would make saag, I don't know what it is about saag, but that just makes my day. And every Ramadan, like I get this craving for saag gosht, and then I always go to the Pakistani restaurant and buy it. So that's my all-time favorite food, and I will side with Hasnain on steaks and ribs as well.
You
Those
know, one really interesting. Sorry to cut you. One really interesting, and then we can just go to Farhan. Was South Asian cuisine in the UK is significantly better than here.
I agree.
That's just
Yeah,
my
Really?
my opinion.
okay, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. I didn't know
Because
that
you guys like it's like embedded in like
Yeah, there's a whole theory about this. It's because
yeah.
it's so deeply rooted from the
Yeah.
colonial age of the way I describe it, I guess, for the Americans in the group, but it's like Mexican food here, right?
Okay, I see what
Mexicans
you're
have
saying.
been here for so long,
Yeah.
right? And their food is so culturally ingrained. You see a Mexican restaurant on every corner. I live in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, right? So I live
Nice.
about an hour from north of Atlanta. And within my block, I live in pretty rural America, and there's 4 Mexican restaurants,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So I feel like the UK is probably very similar, right? Where they see restaurant on every block.
Yeah, I mean, for us, you can literally, it's a thing, even white people are like, hey, we're going to grab a curry tonight. It's curry night. There's always a curry place nearby. I think just for me, it's because, in my lifestyle, I don't eat a lot of Pakistani food right now. So whenever I do, it's such a luxury for me, which is crazy because I am Pakistani, right? But so I just find that kind of really fascinating. Farhan, I feel like you're gonna outshine us with your answers here. But what is your favorite kind of food, or what
I'm
is your
not gonna
favorite
outshine you,
your favorite dishes?
but it's gonna be fried chicken. Can't. I'm a Southern boy, and it doesn't
okay.
matter what type of fried chicken. It could be desi fried chicken. It could be, what if it's chicken and it's been in oil, I'll eat it.
See, fried chicken's also a UK thing as well. Is it a thing in America? Fried chicken, like there's always nearby fried chicken shops. Do you guys have that, or is that just a UK thing? Because
No, it's everywhere. It's
okay,
like,
cool.
especially in the South, it's ingrained into Southern culture.
Wow.
It's sort of like a Southern staple, right? So like
Yeah.
fried chicken, you have KFC, right?
Right.
And then in the South, there's just so many more. Right? Chick-fil-A, huge came from Georgia. I mean, there's so many different even other chains growing around the United States right now. There's Raising Cane's. There's a Filipino fried chicken place that's blowing up.
Wow.
Jollibee. So
Wow.
they're a knockoff of KFC. They started in the Philippines and then they became a chain there, and now it's becoming a chain around the United States.
Wow.
So
Yeah, because I mean, I think cheap. I wouldn't say fried chicken. Cheap chicken is really a thing in the UK here. Like you can go to, again, just the same way you can get a curry. Any kind of fast food corner shop will sell you a chicken burger and chips for like £3 50, and it used to be much cheaper. So it's definitely a part of our culture as well. Farhan, I was going through your bio, and I did want you to speak to us about your journey in becoming a chef, because I feel like the conversation we can have today is very interesting. I've titled the episode "Food, Islam, and Spirituality," and for me, I will put my hands up and say this straight away. I'm not really a foodie. I eat whatever. I'm not really that bothered. I'm not the kind of guy to be very particular and specific about my food. I know Hasnain is a foodie. I know Ali maybe is more intertwined with my theology. Hopefully we'll find out more about the way he sees things.
Because I said something so simple doesn't mean I don't like enjoying food.
I mean, yeah, I enjoy food, but I'm not the kind of guy to go out of my way to spend money on food. But that is a conversation I want to have afterwards. But you do speak a lot about food, identity, and spirituality, and I just feel like that's such a fascinating conversation. But before we get into that, I did obviously you've been on Masterchef. I believe it was season 9. In the UK we also have a series, a Masterchef here as well, and I remember, I think it was 2-3 years ago, there was such a celebration in the Muslim community because there was a Muslim hijabi that won Masterchef, and it was just so groundbreaking for us. So it's really wonderful to see yourself there as well. Just tell us about your experiences on Masterchef. How did it come about, and what was your experience like being on the show?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Masterchef is kind of the journey. So I'll give you some background. So my dad has always been in the food industry, or my parents have always been in the food industry. So when they first moved to America, my dad worked in a halal butcher shop. So, slaughtering the animals, cutting them, kind of handled that. And then later on, we moved over and ran some fast food restaurants. And for the time being, he actually did a hot wing joint in Atlanta, which is interesting. I was like this Desi guy coming to America and then opens a hot wing store in Atlanta. So that was
the American dream.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then later we shut that down, ran a couple Indian restaurants. And then really the story gets interesting when I got a little older, because I've always grown up around it. So I've always been fascinated by food, but then I kind of got to see the duality of it where, yes, it's glamorous to be a chef and be watching Food Network and being on these shows, but then also the hard work that actually goes into being a true restaurant owner and being a chef. Mm-hmm. So cooking is always something I wanted to help out with, because I saw both my parents working all the time. I'll be at home watching Food Network and watching all these little TV shows, and I would want to help my mom out because she would come home from work and then have to prep dinner and all that. So I always try to be involved. Like, hey, mom, what can I do to help out? Like, let me help out. So she used to get me involved, and then my dad is like the big barbecue guy in the family, so all they see barbecue and all that kind of stuff, and so I would be his little assistant. So I've always been really ingrained in it, and so I kind of just picked things up from both of my parents. And then it got interesting when I got to high school, because my high school offered a culinary arts program. And it wasn't just like home ec where you get to bake cookies and do this type of stuff. They had a professional kitchen. And the first year, it was basically like the first year of culinary school. So they teach you they don't teach you, you don't cook at all. It's all theory. Wow. So it's like, here's all the 5 mother sauces of French techniques. Here's how you do your knife cuts. Here's the precise measurements you have to do, but you don't actually do anything. You just study the technique of it. Here's how you run a restaurant. Here's how you manage things. And then the second year is really when you get to go in the kitchen and do things hands-on. And then for our final project, we broke up into 2 teams basically, and we came up with a restaurant concept and ran it from the ground up. So at the end, our final was we had to sell tickets to our mock restaurant and execute it. So we had one person that was like the general manager. We had one person that was the executive chef. That was me for our team. And then we had dishwashers, we had servers. We kind of ran the whole thing. So it gave me a good insight as to the real, I guess, the I don't want to say real because I think this is a whole different topic about Western cuisine versus Eastern cuisine.
Right.
But I want to say kind of classical technique and the actual like theory behind restaurants. And then when I got to college, my dad, we had a halal butcher shop at the time. So he decided to, I'm going to do it on my own and open my own shop up. So he used to be a ran his own slaughterhouse for a while, was supplying the halal meat for most of Georgia.
Wow.
And then he's like, you know what, I'm going to be in the retail game. So saved up money and opened up his own shop. And so alhamdulillah, the shop was doing well. So he's like, you know what, why don't I just go ahead and do a restaurant? And so my dad hit me up in college and was like, hey, Farhan, like you've been cooking your whole life. Like, let's do this restaurant together. And you can kind of come up with a couple things. And that's really where the story gets interesting, because that's when I started kind of experimenting with food. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to cook what my mom taught me or my dad taught me. It's like, hey, how can I really combine my Southern roots with my Desi background?
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that for a couple of years. I moved away to Chicago for dental school. And then that's when the Masterchef thing happened. So even prior to Masterchef, I was cooking on a semi-professional level between the restaurant and helping my dad out with the butcher shop and things like that. And so the Masterchef thing came along, and it was almost like a 6-month casting process between different videos, kind of talking about my journey. And I didn't think I was going to get it, first of all. And then even if I did get it, I was in professional school. I was in dental school. So I was like, okay, how do I explain to my dean, hey, I need to take 6 months off of school so I can go be on a cooking show? And so I was like, I didn't really take it seriously. I wasn't preparing. I didn't like, a lot of people that came were like, oh yeah, man, I watched every episode that existed and wrote down everything that happened and had a cheat sheet basically. And I was like, I've seen this show once or twice. I mean, I'll just wing it. And so, long story short, ended up on the show, did really well, surprisingly. And I think I made it a point when I went on there that I wanted to have a message, right? Because everyone was going to be cooking classical food, right? Like they're going to be cooking Italian stuff. They're going to be cooking, whatever American stuff there is. I knew that I was going to be probably the only Desi guy on the show, only person cooking, from a Desi Muslim background. And so I wanted to make it a point that no matter what we had to do to tie in my roots to it, because again, everyone's gonna make a pasta dish. Everyone's gonna make a burger, right? Like, how can I differentiate myself from the rest of the pack? And it got me pretty far. I mean, spoiler alert, I got 6th place. I failed because of a molten lava cake. It broke when I came out, and Gordon Ramsay was like, "Oh, see you later." Yeah. So. But the really interesting part was after I got back, because I think people recognized the thing I was trying to do with Desi food. And I don't know if you guys have really noticed this in the last, I want to say 5 years, there've been almost like a renaissance of sorts of second generation Desi kids in America kind of waking up to everyone having this similar journey of growing up in America, but then having this duality of, hey, I'm American, I'm Desi, but I am my own thing, because you don't really fit into either category. And so I think that's really where it's been fun. So I joined a collective called Brown in the South. So it's a bunch of renowned chefs that actually call the South their home, and they cook from that perspective. I'm the youngest of the bunch, which is surprising they even reached out to me. I was like, well, like these people have like James Beard Awards. They're like big shot, big deal people. And then I've been doing a pop-up series. So I do a whole different, like each pop-up, it's its own theme. The most recent one, Indian Mexican. And so, yeah, it's been a really cool journey so far. And I think me being Muslim definitely has most of the journey kind of relates to that, because that's really what got me cooking in the first place.
That's beautiful. And I think sorry, Hasnain, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, so back when you were in dental school, did you ever go back to complete it, or you officially left it?
Oh no, I'm a dentist now. I came back, I finished it. Yeah. So
I'm gonna hit you up after.
I got you. Yeah, so that was I always get that question, like, oh, did you go back? I did. I mean, at the end of the day, A, dental school is expensive, so I'd already most of the way done. I had to finish it, right? And B, I always struggle with that idea, especially after doing the culinary program of, do I want to just pursue culinary school full time and just go be a chef and not do anything else? But kind of talking to my parents, talking to my siblings. The tough part is I grew up in a family that ran restaurants, right? So I know how much of a struggle it is to provide for your family in that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone's gonna be Bobby Flay, not everyone's gonna be Gordon Ramsay, not everyone is gonna be these big shot chefs that end up on TV with all these book deals and all these restaurant deals and all this stuff, right? It's like making in the NBA. So I realized I need to be realistic with my dreams, right? So I can always be a dentist who cooks on the side and is a chef. I can never be a chef who's a dentist. So I wanted to, I go around and do lectures at different colleges, and that's kind of what I say, right? It's okay to have dreams. It's okay to dream big, but then also don't make yourself homeless in the process chasing it. There's a way to do it, and you can do it in a smart way. And since I've finished dental school, I've been trying to do both, right? So I work very hard. There's days where I don't get days off on the weekends, right? I just work, 14, 15 days in a row, but I do it because I'm passionate about what I do. So the days I do weekends, I do pop-ups. I work Monday through Friday as a dentist, Saturday, Sunday as a chef, and then Monday through Friday again as a dentist. So it's go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was gonna say I feel like that's the kind of same rule when it comes to all creative passions, be it, we spoke about filmmaking before on this podcast as well in a similar light, or if you're an artist or you're a writer. I feel like these kind of crafts, and dare I say it, and hopefully I won't get grilled for this, but dare I say it, it's not, when it's your passion, I don't feel with creativity it's something you necessarily need to go to university or college to learn, right? I know a lot of filmmakers, for example, that I know who are successful, they didn't necessarily go to school and learn it, but rather they're just very good at their craft. And I think similarly with artists and stuff, you can go to school and learn it, but like you said, it's not gonna pay the bills. And when you're in a position of power over your own finances, you don't need. We discussed this in the last episode, which will be going on next week. But what we said was that you don't need to essentially cook to make sure you have bread at home to feed your family, right? Or you don't necessarily need to write in order to pay yourself, but rather you're doing it because you enjoy it, and that's the most empowering thing, which I think is very important. I wanted to ask you, and Farhan, I'll ask you this question last because again I feel like you'll have the best answer. But Hasnain, let's go with you first. Given that hi, how are you? You okay?
I'm good.
Given that each culture and nation has their own types of food, so obviously Pakistanis have Pakistani food, for example, what does a food say about a people?
What does a food say about a people?
What does a type of food say about the people that it is associated with?
Damn, man. Why you gotta pick me for this hard question first?
It's a deep philosophical question.
It is, because all right, let's take a step back. When it comes to spices, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's Iraqi, right? And he said that, hey,
Iraqi food is the blandest food in the world, by the way.
Yeah, but
no
listen to
offense
this.
Iraqi.
But listen to this. My Iraqi friend, right? He loves when I bring him food, because like it has like that spice and all that stuff that he wants, where he's like drenched in sweat. He loves that stuff. But he said that, hey, we also have spices in Iraq. It's just not like, it's spices and it gives it flavor, but it's a different type of spice. So I think to answer your question, I think what a food says about a certain people, that's a question, right?
Yeah.
I just think it comes down to like their habitat and their creativity, because if you're living in a certain part of the world, like if Ali's living in Colombia and all they have is rice and lentils, then that's kind of ingrained in that culture because that's just geographically what's available there.
Yeah, I think geography is very important. I mean, the thing is, I grew up with in an Iraqi community, and I'm friends with. I'm basically, all my friends are Iraqis, basically, pretty much all of them. And it's just so interesting because their food, and I hope I'm not sounding discriminatory here, but their food is just so bland. And it's like, when they argue with each other about different types of food, I'm like, but neither is good. So what are you arguing about? But the one thing I would say though, the one thing that Iraqis are very good at in Iraq, because I've been to Iraq and I've had this, is their grilled fish. Their grilled fish. I don't know if you guys have had it. If you have any Iraqi restaurants near you, go there and ask for simek mazgoof. Grilled fish, basically, it is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I remember once I went to a restaurant in Iraq, and takes you to like a fish tank, and he goes, "Which fish do you want?" I say that one. Takes it out. He ends his life, and then cooks it there in front of you, and it's one of the best meals I've ever had in my life. So even though their food is bland, in my opinion, anyway, they have a dish which is something that I haven't kind of had anywhere else, and I think. If I was to answer this question, what does food say about people? I would say it's their identity. So me, for example, growing up, we spoke about this on the podcast many times before. Farhan, like I grew up like without, very detached from my Pakistani identity. I didn't speak Urdu. I didn't speak Punjabi. My parents spoke to me in English. We were very westernized in terms of our culture. But the one thing that was Pakistani about us was the food we ate. We'd always be eating Pakistani foods. And I would argue that if it wasn't for that food that we had at home, I would be so detached from my Pakistani identity that I might not even be able to call myself Pakistani. So in that food was identity, heritage, all of that. I think that's what food is. It's like the stamp of a people. If you're at home right now, Hasnain, and you're with family or whatever, and they bring out Mexican food, there's no Mexicans in the room, but there's a Mexican presence in the room, right? Because Mexican food has come out, and I think that's what's so beautiful about food. Ali,
I would question why there's Mexican food in the house. First of all,
you guys don't have Mexican food on. Do you have like Mexican food night? Or?
No, my parents are straight
Okay,
Pakistani.
Oh man,
fine. You're
That's
missing out, bro.
it.
You're missing out. Mexican
I
food.
eat Mexican food when I
man.
go out.
No,
I
but
eat Mexican when I go.
home cooked Mexican food is something else. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
Ali,
mom will slap me.
Ali, what does food say about people?
I agree with you. I think it's their identity, because people are so proud of whatever type of food they have. For example, you're talking about the Iraqis, even though according to you it's bland, and I'm gonna contact some of your friends and tell them you said that, because they're my friends also. But even though you think it's bland, but for them it's a sense of pride, whatever part of Iraq they're from. So not just Iraq, but anywhere, I think it's a sense of pride and identity for whatever type of food there is.
Right, and there is another dish. Before I hand it to Farhan, there is another dish that we need to talk about. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's called baghilla dihin. So basically, it's this breakfast dish that you have. It's literally like, I hope I'm not getting anything wrong. It's basically beans, egg, and like a ton of oil just mixed into one. And you just have to like eat it with your hands. It is crazy. And in fact, there's another dish in Iraq, which I've had before as well, which is basically goat's head. It's literally, that's exactly what it is, and I've dug into it before, and it is I will admit it is quite tasty. Farhan, what would you say that food says about people?
I think you kind of nailed it. I think it is their story, right? It's their culture, right. It's their background. But I think this kind of goes into another point, is it can be someone's background, but it doesn't have to be your specific background, right?
Right.
So I think that's where the interesting part is. So for example, butter chicken, right? Kind of ubiquitous dish, right? Everyone knows it. It's pretty standard, but it didn't exist 200 years ago, right? It
Wow. Mind blown.
Or even probably more than 200 years. I would say before Christopher Columbus, it didn't exist. Why? Because there's no tomatoes in India or Pakistan, because tomatoes are from the New World, right? So tomatoes, chilies, those didn't exist.
Wait,
potatoes.
So tomatoes are not anywhere. They were only found
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes.
Like
tomatoes.
Are you saying they didn't exist outside of America?
Yeah, because they're a New World item. So before Christopher Columbus came and discovered the New World, there was no chili peppers, there was no tomatoes, there's no potatoes found in
No
Asia.
potatoes.
No potatoes. Potatoes are from South America.
Oh my God. Okay. Wow. Didn't know that.
So those things didn't exist, and those are things like you think about, right? Aloo paratha or samosas or whatever. They're so ingrained as our food, but they're not really our food. I mean, they are, but they're not. They're a product of globalization.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that same sense, I hate the word fusion. Okay, I'm gonna just segue here, because when people call my food fusion, it's not what it is. right? I'm not just thinking in my head like I'm just chilling in my bed. Oh, I'm gonna stick these two things together, and that's fun. It's not fusion because that's my story, right? Everything I make is would not exist if my parents didn't come to America and I didn't experience the things I experienced or I didn't eat the things I ate. So I don't think this is a fusion item or the things that make our fusion. It's the next generation of desi food, right? It's the next generation. So like just how potatoes didn't exist in India, Pakistan, 300-400 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
same idea here, where you have all these ingredients that are around you and you adapt and you create your own food when you move, right? So another example, and this one's a little bit more nuanced, is our parents when they moved to the UK or moved to America, they didn't always find the same ingredients they could get outside their
Right.
outside their house, right? So perfect example, if you guys have been to India, Pakistan, the little Indian lime lemons, okay? They're only like this big, they're yellowish green, but that's just a specific variety that's found in India, Pakistan. They don't sell those here. They don't. The closest thing you can get in America here at least is like a key lime, but that's its own flavor too. Or another example, chilies, right? When my parents first moved to America, there were no Patel Brothers, there were no like desi supermarkets here, right? They just adapted and used what they had finding around them, right? So same idea where if you think about it heavily, it's not really true desi food because it's not using the same ingredients that are found locally. They just adapted these jalapenos instead of the desi chilies that you can get in India, right? So in a way, it's just like you adapt to what you have around you and you use what you can get, right? So in that same regard, it's your identity, but your identity shifts depending on what your location is.
Right. Correct.
So I'm Indian, I'm American, but my food is still desi, but it's just this next generation is
Mhm.
desi American food.
I think that's fascinating because you don't especially when you talk about how dishes have evolved over time. And I remember I have read about this before, but it is so interesting because like when you say for example, hey, there was no aloo in desi food before a certain time. You one almost kind of sticks back because we have such a sense of ownership over that food that in my head that's my food. How can you tell me that at one point it wasn't our food? So I think that is so fascinating. And even though you talk about like delicacies, like finding was it you said it was lime
The lime lemon, yeah, like
lime lemon in
the
India,
desi limbu, yeah.
right? So for example, I remember growing up. It's different now, but when I was growing up here in the UK, it was very rare to get mangoes. Mangoes were a delicacy, or at least the right mangoes from India,
Yeah,
Pakistan, right? And my dad, every summer, he used to come like with a crate of them that he used to buy from the shop. He said, right now, these are here for the summer. Make sure you have them. And he used to make such a big deal out of it. And I remember it was like an event whenever he used to bring these mangoes over. And then when I went to Pakistan, when I was when I was 4, and then when I was 10, they were just readily available everywhere. And that to me was just so fascinating because where I lived, it was a delicacy, but back home, where my heritage is, it was everywhere. And because it was just so sweet and so and tasted, so beautiful, my mind associated that with back home. Which I think is another conversation we can have around the way things taste and the way how taste stimulates our memories and the way we think about things. I want to ask you about your upbringing as a Muslim in the South because the one thing we hear, I'm guessing Hasnain and Ali will agree with me, but definitely here in the UK, the minute you say South, the first word that comes to my mind is racist. That's the first word that comes to my mind. No offense to you, but like just generally, there's always this stigma around the South that hey, they're nice, but they're very racist toward anyone who's not white or Christian. So, what was your experience like growing up as a Muslim in the South? Was it something you struggled with, or was it just something that you never even thought about because life was normal for you as it was, for many others?
yeah. I think I didn't realize how different my upbringing was until I experienced what it's like not to be in the South.
Right.
And so we lived all around Georgia, and so like you said, I think you nailed it. People are very nice here. There's the whole concept of Southern hospitality, and people are nice to you, right? They can be racist on the inside,
Mm-hmm.
but they can be nice to you nonetheless, right? And so I didn't really feel different until after 9/11. And I think that's when I started to feel, okay, hey, there's some racism here. There's people that don't like me. But I never really let it bother me, right? I am who I am. It is what it is. And so I think I don't really have a sob story about it, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. Yeah, I face racism, but who doesn't? You know,
Yeah.
especially like
Right.
you just deal with it. And I think as I've gotten older, I just care less and less about it. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, growing up, it did affect self-esteem, right? I think as I've gotten older, I'm more of a I don't give a crap mentality. But when I was younger, yeah, it did affect me, right? I mean, you know, I was the odd one out. I was always the one brown kid wherever I was at. I think my high school had three Desi kids and three Muslim kids, and I was one of them. And I remember the one thing that stood out to me in high school. So there's three Muslim kids. The other two were brother and sister. So the sister was in my class, and she was running for class president. And so she had a little poster on the wall. So I'm walking out of my culinary arts class, right? And the other class lets out at the same time. This kid's like, "Oh, this girl's fucking terrorist," and then rips down her poster off the wall.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, you know, it is what
Wow.
it is. And um, but I think what really affected my upbringing in the South was my cooking inspiration. So there were basically, besides like a few desi spots, there were zero halal restaurants in Atlanta area growing up.
Wow.
And I think for those of you that, like, guys that have like been around nowadays, especially, I mean, even growing up, there's always like some cool spots. Like, okay, you can go get an Iraqi restaurant, you can go to Afghan restaurant, you can go eat some American food that's halal. We didn't have any of that. And now they have like Mexican halal, Chinese halal. We had none of that. So if I ever wanted to eat that type of stuff, I had to cook it myself at home.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so that's really where the inspiration for cooking kind of came about was, hey, I want to eat other food besides just desi food. How do I do it at home? And how can I teach myself how to make it? So then it'll just be researching online what recipes are out there and finding all the ingredients and then making it. And luckily we have a pretty multicultural background here in Georgia. So we could go to the farmers markets, find all the specialty ingredients, things like that, and then just buy halal meat and just learn the techniques and stuff on how to get as close as possible to creating these foods at home. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really where a lot of my story comes about, where I have these kind of desi other food fusion items, or not even fusion, these other mixes, right? Because I grew up making this food for my parents. So like, it's funny, Mexican food is like, we make that twice a week at the house right now. And my parents are, you know, they get tired of the seafood themselves. They're like, oh man, we don't feel like, let's do Mexican night, or let's do taco night, or let's do Asian, let's make some Asian food, let's make some Thai food. Because there's like, you know, they don't feel like eating desi food. And it's funny because it's gotten to a point now with my family that we've gotten so good at making other cultures food is we don't even like going out to eat it. Now there are halal American restaurants, there are halal Chinese restaurants in Atlanta, but we're like, you know what? Like, we make it better than the restaurant. We'll just
So
make
you,
it at home.
you save a lot of money then, basically.
I do now that I'm home. When I was in school, not a lot. I used to eat all the time.
So I just wanted to ask you. So flash forwarding to when you went off to Chicago, and taking your like Southern cooking skills and going to Chicago. And I've been to Chicago twice myself. A lot of people who are from Chicago say the food there is fascinating. Was that like a culture shock to you? Was that like expanding your horizon on food? Like, were you going out more? Were you experimenting more with that? Because now you're in a bigger city with abundance of halal food at that time. What was that like?
Yeah, man. I think that's really where I realized when I moved to Chicago, it's when I realized how different the South is, right? Because growing up, I mean, I didn't have any Muslim friends besides the kids I saw at the center, right? And those most of them are cousins or just my friends. But locally, like high school, I didn't know any Muslim kids. I didn't know any Desi kids. I just had white friends because that's who I hung out with, right?
Yeah.
And so when I moved to Chicago and I heard my friends' stories about, oh yeah, I grew up on Devon and I wore shalwar kurta everywhere, or I went to a school and we spoke Urdu, or I didn't know how to speak English until I was 6 years old, but I was born here. And I'm like, how, you know? And it's just fascinating because it's like I guess I just grew up in this experience where I was forced to be westernized, right? Because I didn't
Right.
have any other perspective. I didn't make my first like proper non-family, non-center Desi friends until I got to college. That's when I met other Desi kids. That's when I met other people that, you know, I didn't know what even other Muslims were until I moved to college. I was like, oh, I mean, I knew like there's obviously differences, but I was like, oh, I actually get to talk this out with you guys and kind of discuss where the nuances are, especially in the food department. But you know, it's just like kind of didn't really experience the variety of what's out there until I moved away. So for
Yeah.
college and Chicago. So Chicago's food scene is very, very interesting, I would say. I lived in an area where it's still very Desi heavy. Like there's like a 2 mile strip of road, and literally there are like 15 halal restaurants. And I loved it because I mean, I cooked like once a week because I'll just go out. There's a spot called Zach's. If you're in Chicago, you need to go check it out. It's in Lombard. Um, they had a meal, and it's so bad for you, but it was delicious. They had a chicken nugget meal. It was 6 chicken nuggets and fries for like $5. So I used to eat it like 2 times a week because I would call it in while I'm studying.
I think
Go pick it up.
I
Come
think I've
back.
been there. I think I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So it was awesome, and I think, you know, especially going on Devon, it's literally like it felt like I was in Hyderabad just walking around. It was like
Yeah.
people in Sharkurta, like just chilling.
It's-
I would go to eat at the restaurant and they'll talk to me in Urdu, and I'm like, oh, I had to talk in Urdu back because I had to figure out they didn't speak English.
You know, I went
It's-
to, when I was in Chicago. I was in Chicago for 3 months for work, like I think like 5-6 years ago, and I went to Sabri's a lot, like almost every.
Yes.
And that was like a thing that I did with a friend of mine that I met there. He would drive me out from I think the inner loop. What is it called, or the south loop? I
Yeah, the
forgot what
loop.
but we would drive out there, and it became like an event. Like every weekend, we would go and drive out there and have nihari.
Yeah,
It's-
man.
I'm so glad you said that about Chicago, because it just made me realize that I've connected most with my Pakistani roots in Chicago, because all my friends in Chicago are Pakistani, and like whenever we're there, like you said, all I hear is Urdu and Urdu jokes, and we go out to Urdu restaurants, and there's like Pakistanis everywhere. So Chicago is definitely a very fascinating place, and you know the one thing everyone says about Chicago is the food scene. You know, the food scene is amazing. That's where you go. I remember I was there once, and my friend was like, "Hey, what do you want to eat?" I said, "I want some Pakistani food," because I know the food here is going to be, like you said, in Devon is going to be amazing. Just backtracking a bit, you spoke about how you grew up without access to halal food, and Ali, I want to bring you in here because I feel like that's the story of a lot of Muslim Americans who grow up. You know, I have cousins in Northern California who say the same thing. When they were growing up, there was very little halal food, and just when they had to buy meat, they had to drive 2-3 hours. I know someone who lives in Edmonton, Canada, and it's a part of his routine. Every 2-3 months, he drives like 2-3 hours to buy halal meat and bring it back. So I just find that so fascinating, especially because when I grew up, halal meat was never a problem for me, especially here in London. It was never an issue. There's always halal meat wherever you go. You know, wherever you're hungry, there's always a halal place within 2-3 minutes of you. Ali, you're in Colombia right now. What is it like in terms of the halal food scene? Because I know it can't be anything like it was back in New York. And you know, how do you deal with it?
Well, for the last
There was a big sigh there. He's like, okay, I've got a lot of grievances. Now it's time for them to come out.
so before I left Florida, I decided that okay, you know what, I'm gonna not eat meat for maybe a week. So I didn't eat meat. I've been
I
having.
was gonna say, how long did you last?
I don't think I've lost weight because I keep eating all these fatty things, but so it started off where I was like, okay, you know what? For a week, I'm not gonna have any meat. I just want to try to be a little more vegetarian and see how it goes. And then I extended it out to 2 weeks. And next thing you know, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try to do a whole month. So yesterday was a full month. So today I was planning on going and having meat, but I still didn't. I didn't have the desire to anymore. So I don't know. Maybe I'll go one of these days, but it's not something that I'm looking forward to. Like, oh my god, I have to go have meat. But to answer your question, there are halal meat restaurants here in Colombia, in Medellin.
Okay.
Arab restaurants. There's some Indian restaurants. Actually, not too far, like 5 or 10 minutes down the street from me.
So it's not that difficult to get halal meat in Colombia then?
No, like,
Wow,
and
that's amazing.
you can actually go out towards the farms and maybe like go butcher yourself. I've never tried it. Maybe I'll have a stand come.
I'll do it.
I think I think that does kind of remind me of a conversation, which is, from what I understand, especially if you want to get into the sunnah of the Prophet and the way he used to live his life, meat for him was a delicacy. So he taught his followers to eat meat, essentially once every 30, 40 days. And I'll definitely say that, whenever I have gone vegetarian, and it's not because I've meant to, it's just because I couldn't be bothered to go buy meat for a while. So my wife ends up cooking vegetarian food. But like whenever there's been like a week of me thinking, hey, you know what, I've been pretty chilled out this week. I haven't been like angry or riled up, and I've realized that it's because we haven't had meat for a while, and I've just been eating vegetarian food for the longest time. And I feel like there is this concept in Islam of you are what you eat. And I remember a friend of mine was telling me this, like, so for example, we spoke about chicken. We all love eating chicken here, but chickens as animals are not like the most I don't know what the right word is. They're not the most
Clean.
Not just clean, but even like their characteristics, that they're not very noble, let's say, animals, right? So and I think there is this thing in Islam that when you eat different types of meat, you do inherit those kind of characteristics. So I think it's just so important to maybe this is another conversation for another time, but I feel like when you get into it, and you get into spirituality and character and the way and living a clean life and having good mental health, and being healthy, I feel like a lot of it, of a massive amount of it comes down to what you eat, your diet and how you eat. We have a lot of guidelines in Islam in terms of eating, and in terms of never, for example, eating before you sleep, and always making sure that when you eat, for example, you're never completely full, which does help you with your health, and I think just generally with your mental health and your spirituality as well. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ali. Farhan, leading on from that, I want to ask you, what role, if any, does spirituality play in your food making process? I know you mentioned that being Muslim is a big part of your journey, but more so away from the identity side of things. But like when you sit down to, for example, to make a meal or plan a dish, what role does spirituality play? Do you like say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, this is for God, or how does spirituality factor in?
I think a lot of it kind of comes down to niyat, right? Like what your intentions are when you're cooking. And for me, I think it just depends on what the case is, right? So if it's, I'm cooking for my family, it's like, okay, hey, my parents do so much for me, I want to give back to them today. Or, my family does so much for me, today's my turn. Or if it's for an event, it's like, okay, hey, this is the intent here, and my niyat here is to show my audience who my family is, what our story is,
right,
and telling that story through food. And I think that kind of is a lot to do with it. But I think the biggest thing for me is the identity part, right? Where it's giving a voice to these kids who grew up in America and have this background and have this Muslim identity, but then don't really know how to channel that energy, right? And how do you come to terms of being split between two cultures or two identities, right? And I think kind of going back to what I was speaking on maybe even a little earlier was, I didn't have other Muslim friends until college, right? Or at least Muslim friends that were different from who I am, right? And as funny as this is to say, so I think I have like 3 best friends or 4 best friends. One of them, I'm Shia. My other best friend's Sunni. My other best friend is Ismaili, and another one's Hindu. Right? There's 4 of us.
So you're like a
mixed bag.
An exemplar unit for intro and interfaith.
Yeah, for sure. And we've had plenty of very interesting conversations, and especially even with my friends, my Sunni friends. Even there's even spectrum within that as well, right? So when I was in college, I was actually the MSA president, which was that's a whole other topic, but
that must be fun.
It was interesting. I could definitely say I was the most interesting, like the most active and probably the most left MSA president my college has ever had. But that being said, I wouldn't say I'm super religious that per se, but I think the biggest thing was I was a community builder. I wanted to figure out ways, hey guys, yes, we all have these different sects and different backgrounds, but what brings us together, right? And so my biggest goal in college was like, hey, how do I build a community of Muslims that you may identify within a different flavor, but we're all Muslims at the end of the day, right? And so how do I and the big thing that brought everyone together was food, right? Everyone loves a free meal, especially when you're in college. And
Absolutely.
so all of these events always center around some type of food, whether it be, Desi food or Afghan food or whatever we decide to cater. But then we would try to have these conversations. And I think the interesting part about being Muslim in the food world is how many rules there are and how many different rules different people have. So if you're ever trying to host an event, it's a nightmare because it's always like, okay, hey man, you always have one person that's like, oh, is this chicken hand cut? You have those people. Then you have those people like, oh, can I have the certificate of where you bought this from? And then what was the guy's name that cut it? And then what was the name of the cow?
I might be
And
that
then,
guy.
Wow.
Forgive me.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that
Wow.
everyone has their own. Food is such a personal thing, right?
Right.
It's what you take in. It's everyone practices in their own way, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that people get very particular, right? We have
Yeah.
a halal butcher shop too now as well, and I get that question every day, like, oh hey man, like is this machine cut or is this hand cut halal chicken, right? Where's the farm that your dad slaughters at, or who slaughters your meat, or where does that come from?
Like on an honest question, do you get offended by those kind of questions?
No, I don't know. I don't, because it's your own business, right? At the end of the day, it's your personal story. But I do appreciate people asking, because again, halal as a term means so much to so many different people, right? You have like the Zabiha crowd, you need to be hand cut Zabiha, halal, and then you have the other end of the spectrum where it's Bismillah, and then everything's freestyle, right? It's as long as it's kosher. Is this person a Christian? Is this person Muslim? It doesn't matter. Say Bismillah, call it a day, right? So, you always get into these theological arguments with people. And it's always very interesting because, I mean, everyone lies on the spectrum somewhere. But I appreciate people asking first, right? Before they come back and they're like, oh, this is not what I expected. Now I'm mad at you about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely interesting. I think here we have that issue as well, especially when it comes to halal. And I do want to take a quick segue before we speak about halal, because I think halal is a very important topic. But just before I take that segue, over here, for example, it's in London. It's a thing that there's just so much haram food that's being sold under the guise of it being halal. And I feel like even then, and this is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but there are differences when it comes to Sunnis and Shias in terms of how to slaughter food, because there is a school of thought. I don't mean like a sect, but like there's a school of thinking within Sunni Islam, for example, that you can consume meat that wasn't that's not zabiha by saying Bismillah on it or before you eat it or stuff like that, which is why it's quite funny. But Shias here, for example, sometimes we try and find the most hardline Muslim butcher shops because we know they're going to be the more halal. So that's an interesting bridge between two different perspectives. But definitely, I think it's hard for us because you I feel like from one perspective you go down that rabbit hole far enough, you'll find something that you might not like and might make you doubt all food. You can never be 100% certain unless you see how every single animal was killed, and the debate on how to on how sure you must be obviously depends on your particular perspective when it comes to halal. But before we continue the topic of halal, I wanted to discuss this quite briefly, but it's about the money we spend on food. And Hasnain, this is where I'm going to bring you in, our champion. You said you eat, where do you eat? You said you eat, what's that place called? That restaurant?
I just get chicken and rice for $5.
No, the thing is, I want to have this conversation because I'll give you my perspective, and I think that anything I'm not against spending money. You know, I think anything for me, anything that I spend money on has to have some sort of ROI. That's how I'm an accountant. I see everything as return on investment. So, for example, I'll happily spend money on a holiday or a vacation because I know that that's worth the experiences are priceless, right? Or I'll spend money on a family outing because even like materialistic things, like we had that whole episode on sneakers. I'll buy a pair of sneakers that I like because I know I like them, right? So, but when it comes to food, I personally don't like spending large amounts of money on food because whether I go to a high-end restaurant or I go to the local chicken shop, I'm still gonna be full afterwards,
right?
And I'm not gonna really feel that different. What's your perspective on this?
So let's admit I do spend a lot on food. I usually tend to go on the more upscale restaurants because I like the ambiance. But steak in general is an expensive dish.
You like the lighting, yeah?
I like the lighting. I like the way they treat me. I like the massages they give me while I eat. Like it's amazing. But like my favorite food is steak, right? It's typically an expensive dish, right? And the way it's prepared and it being halal and who cooks it really well and the experience, like for me, that's like I worked hard, and this is kind of like barakah for me that I can go ahead and spend and enjoy this, because I worked pretty hard for it. Just like how we had the sneaker conversation,
Yeah.
like I can afford to get Jordan 5s. I'm not going to drop any names. Jordan 5s, because God put me in.
I bought those to sell, by the way, not to wear, just to clarify.
Reseller. We have a reseller here. But I
just
think that's how
recently flipped mine too.
Yeah, nice. We're talking about the Jordan 4s, the yellow and red ones. Yeah, I managed to win the raffle. So they're sitting.
I got those the Union ones.
You got the Union.
Nice.
We'll have a conversation afterwards.
Yeah.
We should probably just do a different podcast about sneakerheads.
Sorry, Hasnain, carry on.
So I look at food the same way. I want to enjoy my meal, and don't get me wrong, the chicken and rice guy who's selling me a $5 platter gives me the same fullness as me going to get a steak somewhere else, right?
Right.
That's going to be triple the price. But for me, it's just like alhamdulillah, like I can afford this, and I'm going to feast well because my God has given me an abundance. And if you're thankful, I will give you more, right? So that's kind of how I take it.
It's your way.
I know you're laughing at me because I'm crazy, but this is how I look at it.
No, I'm not laughing at you. I do definitely value your perspective. And the thing is, even for me, for example, when it comes to like steak and ribs, I agree with you 100%. We have a restaurant here. I won't mention the name, but they sell a steak for a certain amount. But like when you have that steak, 100% that you're getting your money's worth because the steak is worth that. You can't deny that. And I think for me, like my perspective, and just to clarify, my perspective is that I'm happy to go to a restaurant, a high-end restaurant even. But for me, in my head, I'm not paying for the food. I'm paying for the outing. I'm paying for the experience.
Right.
So that's how I look at it. Ali, what's your perspective on this? I'm interested to know, because I know you're very humble when it comes to your rice and your lentils now. But in your past life, when you're living in New York and Hasnain calls you up and wants to go to that place with that the guy does the salt thing, like that. So I can't do it.
So I think I'm a mixture between you two. I agree with you where you're spending money on food, but it's gonna fill you up. Secondly, obviously, you want to go and have a good experience, good ambiance, as well as good food. But what I have found is a lot of times when you go for good ambiance, the food isn't always that great.
Right.
Or I'm not full because they're giving you like that much. So it's like, okay, you're going to fancy, but you're going just to go. So I would rather be full and have good tasting food than to go and spend $400 or $500 just to eat in a fancy restaurant. Like, once in a while, okay, fine, but I'll probably eat before and after because I'm not going to get much food there that's going to taste good.
Fair enough. Farhan, I feel like we're all we're just speaking without knowledge, but you are the resident food expert here. What's the final opinion on this that we should take home? Or what's your opinion?
I'm more in Hasnain's court, honestly. I spend a lot of money on food, a little more than I care to admit, even though I couldn't cook at home, right? But it's the idea of, my fiance and I, when we're in Chicago, Friday and Saturday night, that would be our day to go out to eat. I could cook at home, I could do whatever, but going out to eat was kind of our thing. And it wasn't necessarily just the fact of like, okay, I want to get satiated, but like kind of what you said, it's the experience, right? It's the outing. And for me, it was more feeding the soul too, because it was inspiration. Here's someone whose restaurant we're going to, they dedicated their life to being a chef, to push these boundaries, right? And to try that food was really neat. And I think for my dental school graduation, we got, or I guess me and Sukena, we both got tickets to Alinea, right? So really big, I think is rated top 5 restaurant in the United States. It used to be number 1 in the world at a time. And so we had this meal. I don't want to say how much we spent on it because it was a lot. Okay. But more than I care to admit on a podcast, but it was a lot. And we went to McDonald's afterwards, but
that's where everyone ends up.
Yes. But the thing is, the experience of it, I wouldn't trade because it was just so jarring from what food. It was more theater than food, right? You got to experience. It was the ambiance, the smells, the taste, the whole package that you paid for. It wasn't just a meal. It's transcendental than that, right?
Right.
And I think that's the cool thing that food can do. Like you were speaking on earlier, smells you associate with memories, right? And smelling things is half of what you eat, correct? So from a Shia background, okay, this is actually really funny. So, like the Shia thing, especially in Muharram, is like the loban, right? Like you get the smell, and it instantly takes you back, right? So somehow this day we went to go eat there, the dessert dish is based on the wood that they used to create that. So they imported logs of this wood from the Middle East, and they made a tea out of it. They made a cake out of it, and then they lit a piece of the log on fire when they brought it out. So literally the restaurant during dessert smelled like the mambara, and we're drinking loban tea and having this little dish that's made from the wood that they steep this flavor in. So basically, instantly, I was like,
basically, white people spend large amounts of money, and what we get for free.
Basically, yeah. Except we could drink it instead of just smelling it, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. It was definitely a moment. It was like, oh, me and Sukena were looking at each other like, dude, this smells like the center. Like, what do we do? Why do we spend this much money?
I think, like when I talk about my perspective on it, the caveat is, like I said from the beginning, I'm not a foodie. Any of my friends will tell you that whenever, we say they ask me, what do you want to eat? I'm like, anything. I don't care. I'm happy to eat anything. But I feel like we spend money on things that bring us joy, right? So someone, for example, as someone who loves film, I will always spend money on cinema, without any doubt. A friend of mine might not do that, but he might be big into football, so he'll spend money on football matches, for example. So I feel like everyone spends money on what they appreciate most. And obviously, if you are into food, the way you talk about, obviously you are a chef, so the way you talk about, the experience food gives you, and essentially just exploring other types of food that might inspire you to make your own dishes, that is an investment on your part as well, right? So I think that is very important. I do want to end with a brief conversation on halal, and I feel like this is such a large topic, so I don't want to take too much time. It deserves a podcast in itself. But I do want to ask you guys what halal means to you, because I feel like there's so many levels to halal. There's the basic, hey, we need to eat somewhere, let's look for a restaurant that has a halal sign on it, and then there's also the conversation around, for example, halal and tayyib. So the Quran says when we eat food to make sure it's both halal and tayyib. Halal means the way it's been killed, and tayyib means it has to be clean and pure, right? So there is that conversation to have as well. Hasnain, what does halal mean to you?
What you mentioned about how it has to be slaughtered in the proper way and then cleaned. That's usually what halal means to me. And that's usually what I seek out when I go to restaurants. But living in New York City, it's kind of difficult to do that. But speaking to a lot of sheikhs and imams here, you asking somebody, hey, is this halal? And they say yes, is more than enough for you to go ahead and eat it.
Mhm.
Because I think questioning it is where like you get more into doubt. And then once you enter that doubt, then you have to leave. But if I ask you, Nouri, like, hey, is this chicken halal? He's like, yeah, it's halal. It's 100% halal. And then for me as a Muslim, I have to take your word for it, right? A fellow Muslim.
I see what you're saying.
So that's kind of how I go about it. But for me, like halal means like clean, cut, everything good. But when it comes to living in a big city like New York, where you have abundance of food, like I literally live a few blocks away from two long like strips of like halal restaurants. So you know they all say yes, we're halal, but I gotta just take their word for it and take it from there.
I think with New York it's so interesting because halal, and I never really realized this until I went to New York myself. Because you know you always hear about those like halal food guys and halal food trucks, but the word halal is so like embedded into New York culture, right? Like it's not just a word or type of food. It's part of the culture, you know. You have those food trucks giving out halal food to not just Muslims, but you know people of all different colors and faiths. So you know, I think that's what's so fascinating. I think to me, when it comes to halal, I think the conversation around tayyib as well is an important one to have. So I'll give you guys an example. I know I did a documentary once years ago on this couple who basically had enough and went and opened their own farm and basically started slaughtering their own animals. And the reason they did that it was because their point was that we keep having conversations around halal, but we forget about tayyib. And tayyib obviously means, you know, the animal is clean and pure, but it's also about how the animal is treated. Just hopefully paraphrasing and hopefully not twisting their words. They were saying it's also about how the animal is treated before it's killed, right? So it's important, for example, for the animal to be in a happy place, to be healthy when you before it's slaughtered. So I'm sure in America as well, definitely in the UK, there is this whole thing of caged hens, you know, chickens who are raised in cages and eventually killed. And, you know, we had that conversation around you are what you eat. Eating that impacts you. You know, those chickens aren't really healthy because they haven't been raised properly, which is why, you know, even when I go to the supermarket, I always try to get free range eggs as opposed to eggs from caged hens because I feel like it is healthier. And when it comes to, you know, trying to find out what is and isn't halal, for me, because I'm so worried about what I consume, I wouldn't say like I'm a freak about it, but I'm definitely a bit cautious. For me, it's like, do I really trust that it is halal? So my definition of doubt, my barometer for doubt would be different to your barometer for doubt. So for me, for example, if I'm not convinced, I wouldn't eat there personally. And you know, it reminds me of a hadith that I heard from Imam Ali alayhi salam. I heard it in a lecture once, and the speaker mentioned this hadith. Imam Ali says basically, if a drop of alcohol fell into a well, and that well was filled with soil, and from that soil grew grass, and a sheep came and ate from that grass, I would not eat the meat of that sheep. So he's talking about how far he'd go to make sure that whatever enters his gut is absolutely pure.
Right.
And obviously, it's not like I make sure that every single lamb that's been killed hasn't eaten from grass that's been grown over a well that once had alcohol in it. But you know, I do feel like for me, just being a bit extra cautious benefits me in the long run. Ali, what does halal mean to you?
I think I would agree with what Hasnain was saying. I think we're at the same level with that.
Nice. Any words of wisdom you want to share, or I don't just
any
mean
one-liners?
I don't just mean like halal as meat. I mean like as a culture, as an identity.
Well, as a culture and identity in New York, for example, I mentioned to one of my coworkers a few years ago, you know, I only eat halal, and she thought that I only eat from the halal trucks because that's what.
Yeah, that's basically what it is here.
So there's that, and then I also went to one of the Yemeni, what is it called, the delis on the corners that we have over there, and I was like, "Hey, is it halal?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yeah, there's no pork." So that's a whole different level of halal for them, right? So I think it varies on how you look at it, but again, I look at it, I guess, in a very similar way as Nouri, yourself, and Hasnain.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I remember my cousin once told me that he went to a restaurant and asked them if it's halal, and the guy was like, Yeah, sure, of course it is. And I think it's just so interesting that people would go all that way, not understanding what it is, but they want to sell you food, right? So that is what it is. Farhan, I feel like you have a deep and constructed answer for us. What does halal mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of goes more along with Hasnain saying, it has to be slaughtered correctly, it has to be cleaned. But I'm not, if I go to the restaurant, I ask if it's halal, they say yes. I'm not gonna sit there and have a theological argument with them like,
Yeah.
where's your meat coming from? Let me see the box. Let me do this. I'm more laid back than that.
Yeah.
But I think it comes from being in the industry, right? So I understand the background of it, right? So obviously there's a pretty large Muslim population in the world nowadays, no doubt, right? No brainer. But it kind of goes hand in hand with the sort of struggles that come with supplying halal meat at a large volume,
Right.
right?
Right.
So there's practicalities involved with it, right? So, there's always the most obvious one is like the hand cut versus machine cut chicken. Okay. Hand cut halal, the whole idea is, okay, there's a person there slitting the throat, letting the blood drain, and there's a Muslim person doing that, right? Versus machine cut is there's a tape recorder playing, the dua, and then there's just a saw blade cutting through
Right.
these chickens' necks, right? The only difference between the machine cut halal and non-machine cut or just regular chicken is if the tape recorder is playing or not.
Mm-hmm.
Which, surprise, surprise, is playing 100% of the time. So like here in Georgia, it's actually kind of the meat chicken capital of the United States in North Georgia. So like a huge chunk of chicken gets processed in North Georgia. And so my dad has actually toured all these places and he's told me like, hey, this is how they process this meat. So I'd say 95% of the chicken that's labeled halal, machine cut halal, is slaughtered this way, right? Where there's a saw blade just cuts through the throat. There's someone there or someone not there overseeing the process. And the chicken that's sold that's not labeled halal is also still processed the same way. It's just a matter if there's a sticker on the box or not. Okay. So it's interesting because then you kind of, you guys probably heard of Creekstone beef, right? Like the whole phenomenon behind Creekstone. It's the same idea now occurring with this chicken. So I think the farm's name is, I'm trying to think of it, Marjack. That's what it is. It's called Marjack Farms.
I need to write that down.
Yeah. So there's all these restaurants here in Georgia and actually across the United States that use Marjack chicken. But 100% of their chicken is actually halal because it's either a matter of the stickers on it or not. Okay. So this is sort of like the Creekstone phenomenon. So there's actually Chick-fil-A's here and across the United States that use Marjack chicken specifically.
So lucky.
So there's halal Chick-fil-A, you got to call and ask what chicken they're using. Wow. Right. So there's sort of this Creekstone effect now happening with this chicken, but that kind of goes into a different point, right? Then you go into the other side of the spectrum where people are like, hey, I'm only eating hand cut halal chicken. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Sure. If that's your belief, that's fine. But there's also nuances with that, right? Obviously, you paying somebody as a factory to sit there and cut meat costs money, right? Yeah. So where does that cost go? Onto the consumer, right? So there's another brand that prides themselves on doing hand cut only, right? There's two of them. I'm not going to mention either's names. One's a local guy that does it, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I only sell hand cut halal. Multiple times my dad and other associates have seen him just buying boxes of chicken from the machine cut chicken and passing it off as hand cut. Okay.
He probably just cuts the
There's
fat
another
off.
Yeah, that's his hand cut, right? So and then there's another guy. This is a bigger company, but they pride themselves on doing it. But here's the cost you pay for it, right? We can sell machine cut halal chicken for like $3 something a pound all day, every day, right? Because that's just the profit margin on it. But if you start getting into this true hand cut halal, you're doubling that. So the same 1 pound of chicken breast is now costing $6. Okay. So then it goes into the politics of, okay, what is that worth to you?
Yeah.
Is it worth double the price? Can you afford double the price if you want to maintain your lifestyle? Or if you want to maintain your halal identity and halal roots. So is that worth it to you? Yes or no? And then the other question now is, there's actually another company that's coming up that's doing online butcher shop, right? So you can order online, right? There's a couple of these guys doing it now. Order online to get shipped to your house.
Yeah, we have a few of those here.
Exactly. And their big thing here in America is their tayyib and halal. That's their whole big thing. It's like, oh, we control the process A to Z. And you're paying a premium for that. It's just, you can get a 2-pack of chicken or 2 pounds of chicken breast, and it's $12-13. So it's almost like then it becomes sort of a thing where it's like, okay, how much extra money do you have to blow on this, right? If you're a first generation immigrant family coming to America, you want to eat halal, are you going to pay to feed your family? Are you going to pay double the price of meat to get hand cut halal? Or are you just going to go to the other guy that just has regular halal? It's still halal either way, right? If you're like me or Hasnain or Ali, or even you, Nouri, go to the store. Hey, is it halal? Yes. Okay, cool. Thanks. Or you're going to sit there and inspect it. And then it becomes an issue of, is your financial capability then reflective onto your, I guess, religious status? Is this, is Allah going to be like, hey, man, you didn't eat hand-cut halal because you couldn't afford it, I'm gonna get you. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, then it goes into a concept of niyat then, right? Your intention is to eat halal meat, and you're buying halal meat that you can afford and is available to you based on your own socioeconomic status. And then are you going to get knocked for that if you don't do it?
I think what's so interesting, and this is definitely a topic we probably have to have again, because halal is such a massive topic in itself, but I've done a few documentaries on what halal means, and I interviewed various people. So here, for example, we have various organizations that certify halal meat, right? And for some you have to pay a premium, and there's one called HMC, which is like meant to be like the higher end. These guys are definitely 100% halal brand, and not to put them down, but I remember someone posed this question to me, and they said, "Who told you these guys are the most legit halal brand?" The people who told you are themselves, because their brand is to tell you we are the best brand to go for, right? So halal itself is a business now, where even certification is a business. Everyone wants you to come in. Everyone wants you to go to them to certify your meat, because they have that image with them as well. So that's definitely a whole conversation to have as well. I feel like we can go on this forever.
If you don't want to, if I can cut in really quick.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Going off of that, that's just, like you said, it's a whole business. So when I lived in Chicago, there's this Mexican restaurant that became halal. So it's a Mexican family that owned it. They're not Muslim. But a group like this went in there like, hey, we'll sell you the certificate. Let us alter your menu. Let's show you where to buy the meat and all this stuff. Get rid of the pork, and we'll drive new business in your door, because now you'll have the certification. And it worked. I mean, a lot of us would go eat there. But it's this whole, like you said, it's the whole business in and of itself. Like, hey, do you have this certificate or do you have that certificate? Who's your meat supplier? Who's this and who's that? And it's almost a shame. I mean, that's my opinion. I think niyat definitely matters, right? And I think your intentions. I don't think God is petty, right? He's not gonna be like, oh man, I gotcha. That was not really halal. That was naughty. Like, I don't think that's my opinion on it, right? And so it's just one of those things where I almost feel like it's becoming a socioeconomic thing, where it's like, almost like a classist issue, where it's like, oh, I can afford to now buy this special meat and you can't, and this is
very good, very great.
Well, Farhan, I want to thank you so much. We have to wind it down, and I'm really sorry we have to, because we could go on forever. Hopefully we'll bring you back on board, but just want to take this moment to really appreciate you, and anyone who's listening right now who wants to get in touch or follow your journey. Where can they get in contact, and where can they follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Farmo. That's my nickname. You can follow me on Twitter at Farmo Cooks. You can see some recipes and just what I'm up to on farmocooks.com. I'm on Facebook as Chef Farhan. I'm most active on Instagram. So if you guys want to come say hi, say hey over there.
Wonderful. Farhan, Thank you so much. Take care. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.